What if everything you believed about the war in Ukraine was about to be shattered in a single night? Imagine waking up to a world where the rules you thought governed modern conflict have been rewritten, almost overnight. This is not just a story of rockets and headlines. It is a lesson in how quickly the ground can shift beneath our feet, and how the ripple effects of war can reach every corner of the globe. On the night of October 16th, Ukraine endured a relentless onslaught of drones and missiles that hammered its most vital regions. For months, signs of escalation had lurked beneath the surface, but nothing could prepare civilians and military leaders for the scale and coordination of what was to come. The attack was not a random act of violence. It was a calculated, methodical operation designed to cripple the very infrastructure that keeps a nation running. Picture this. In the darkness before dawn, as most people slept, the sky erupted with wave after wave of hypersonic and ballistic missiles. These were not ordinary weapons. Hypersonic missiles, traveling at speeds exceeding 5 times the speed of sound, are nearly impossible to intercept. Ballistic missiles, arcing high and striking down with devastating force, targeted power plants, substations, and key logistical hubs. To grasp the gravity, consider a historical parallel. In World War II, the British city of Coventry was targeted by the Luftwaffe in a series of raids intended to shatter British resolve by destroying its industrial heart. The Coventry Blitz left the city in ruins and had far-reaching effects on morale and production. The Ukrainian attack, in its precision and ambition, echoed such historical efforts to break the back of a nation by targeting its arteries of survival. As the missiles struck, advanced Ukrainian air defense systems, some of the best in Eastern Europe, supplied by Western allies, were overwhelmed. Despite years of investment in radar, anti-missile batteries, and surveillance, the sheer volume and speed of the attacks left even the most seasoned operators scrambling. Imagine the pressure in those command rooms, alarms blaring, screens lighting up, officers shouting rapid orders, and outside, the sudden blackout engulfing entire cities. Social media exploded with panic and confusion. Throughout Ukrainian platforms like Telegram and Twitter, people posted frantic messages: waking nightmare, total darkness, no power, no news, just fear. Families huddled in basements, children cried, and the illusion of safety evaporated in moments. This was not just infrastructure damage, it was psychological warfare, a direct assault on the will to resist. In Kyiv, the capital and nerve center of Ukraine, 2 of the largest power plants went offline within minutes. To put this into perspective, these facilities supplied a combined total of well over 1,300 megawatts, enough electricity to power a city of millions. Imagine New York or London suddenly losing half its power grid in a single hour. Subways stop, hospitals switch to emergency generators, internet connections drop, and the city's heartbeat stutters. The blackout quickly spread to surrounding regions. Kharkiv, Poltava, and Dnipropetrovsk, all major urban centers and logistical hubs, were targeted with surgical precision. The loss was not just numbers on a grid. It meant food could not be refrigerated, water pumps failed, mobile networks went silent, and life as people knew it ground to a halt. Military commanders faced an impossible dilemma. With communications disrupted, some units were cut off from central command. The fog of war thickened as rumors raced ahead of facts. Are we surrounded? Is help coming? Should we withdraw? In some sectors, the answer was not clear, and the consequences would soon be felt on the front lines. Meanwhile, the international reaction was swift and dramatic. Within hours, Western leaders issued statements that moved beyond cautious diplomacy. In Washington, the president and senior Pentagon officials warned that the United States and its allies could increase their involvement if the conflict continued to spiral. The language was sharper than in previous months, and the world took notice. Donald Trump, never one to shy from the spotlight, publicly declared his readiness to negotiate directly with President Zelensky. This was more than grandstanding. It was a signal that political calculations were shifting. He even hinted at the possibility of new offensives, suggesting that the West was running out of patience for a frozen conflict. In Moscow, The response was equally forceful. Russian officials issued their own ultimatums, making it clear that any escalation by the West would be met with countermeasures. The rhetoric was reminiscent of the Cuban Missile Crisis, when miscalculation nearly led to nuclear war. Each side drew new red lines, and the risk of a wider confrontation grew. Why should anyone outside Ukraine care? The answer lies in the interconnectedness of the modern world. In the 21st century, the front lines of war are not confined to distant battlefields. They run through energy markets, supply chains, and digital networks that affect us all. The choices made in these tense hours could reshape not just Ukraine, but the balance of power from Europe to Asia and beyond. Consider the impact on global markets. As news of the attacks broke, energy prices spiked across Europe. Natural gas futures soared, and electricity grids in neighboring countries braced for possible shortages as Ukraine's exports vanished. Investors scrambled, currencies wobbled, and the specter of inflation loomed. In the past, wars were often contained by geography. Today, a missile strike in Kharkiv can ripple through the stock exchanges of London, Frankfurt, and New York within minutes. Imagine yourself as a business owner in Berlin, dependent on Ukrainian grain or energy supplies. Overnight, your costs rise, contracts are thrown into doubt, and the economic calculations you made just days before are suddenly obsolete. Or picture a family in Warsaw, whose electricity bills spike as Poland tries to secure alternative supplies. These are not abstract consequences. They are the lived reality of globalization under siege. But let us return to the ground and trace how the attacks unfolded. The pattern was chilling in its clarity. Beginning in the east, strikes hit Kharkiv, a city with a pre-war population of nearly 1.5 million, known for its heavy industry and technological innovation. Next, the waves moved south to Poltava, a critical rail and road junction, and then west toward Dnipropetrovsk, a region vital for both military logistics and civilian life. Each target was chosen for its strategic value. Power stations, substations, and key transformer nodes were destroyed or disabled. Logistics hubs, warehouses storing food, fuel, and munitions, were engulfed in flames. Command centers, often hidden in civilian neighborhoods, were hit with pinpoint accuracy, forcing military leaders to relocate and disrupt their operations. A concrete example. In Poltava, local authorities reported that at least 2 vital substations were hit, plunging tens of thousands of homes into darkness. In Mirgorod, a smaller city known for its mineral springs, 3 confirmed missile strikes damaged the main water treatment facility, leaving residents without clean water for days. The cascading effect was immediate. Schools closed, businesses shuttered, and emergency services stretched thin. Meanwhile, in Kharkiv, the blackout was nearly total. Hospitals struggled to keep life support systems running as generators kicked in. Elderly residents, dependent on elevators to reach their apartments, were trapped for hours. Public transportation ground to a halt, and police warned of rising crime as darkness provided cover for looters. The psychological blow was immense, a reminder that modern cities are only a few hours away from chaos when the power goes out. On the front lines, the situation was dire. Units defending the approaches to Kupiansk, a town recently celebrated as a symbol of Ukrainian resistance, found themselves cut off. Without reliable communications or resupply, commanders faced a terrible choice: hold their ground and risk encirclement, or withdraw and cede territory. In some cases, entire villages, 40 in a single day, were evacuated. Families packed what little they could carry and joined convoys heading west, not knowing if they would ever return. Historical parallels abound. During the siege of Leningrad in World War II, the city's population endured nearly 900 days of starvation, cold, and constant bombardment. The pain was not only in the loss of life, but in the daily struggle to maintain hope amid darkness and deprivation. Ukraine's ordeal, while different in scale and context, echoes that same battle of endurance, where survival hinges not just on weapons, but on the resilience of a society. Another telling indicator: the number of Ukrainian prisoners of war is rising. Reports surfaced of groups of 10, sometimes 20, soldiers surrendering together. This is not just exhaustion, it is the breakdown of unit cohesion. In the fog of war, isolated groups must decide whether to fight on or lay down their arms. Each surrender is a crack in the wall of resistance, and analysts warn that such trends often precede larger collapses. The official narrative, however, struggles to keep pace with reality. While government spokespeople insist the situation is under control, local reports paint a far grimmer picture. In towns once considered safe, gunfire and explosions are now part of daily life. The illusion of security is fading, and with it, the confidence of both soldiers and civilians. Internationally, the stakes are rising fast. Western leaders, once content to supply arms and economic aid, now face mounting pressure to do more, or to find a way out. The language of diplomacy has shifted. Statements once couched in careful ambiguity now carry the weight of threats and ultimatums. The United States, in particular, is signaling that its patience is not unlimited. A practical step for anyone watching this crisis unfold is to pay attention to these shifts in tone. In the past, wars have been preceded by subtle changes in diplomatic language. Before the Gulf War in 1991, for example, a series of increasingly blunt statements from Washington and Baghdad signaled the approaching storm. Today, similar patterns are emerging in the rhetoric between NATO, Russia, and their partners. But what makes these latest attacks fundamentally different from previous escalations? It is the convergence of technology, tactics, and psychological warfare. Modern conflicts are no longer fought solely with soldiers and tanks. They are waged in cyberspace, on energy grids, and in the minds of populations. A missile that shuts down a city's power can do more damage to morale than 1,000 shells on a distant battlefield. Consider the role of drones. Once the domain of science fiction, drones are now ubiquitous on the battlefield. In Ukraine, both sides deploy swarms of drones for surveillance, targeting, and direct attack. The October 16th assault featured not just long-range missiles, but waves of drones programmed to seek out and destroy specific targets. This level of coordination is unprecedented and signals a new era of warfare, where machines make decisions in real time and human defenders struggle to keep up. Another scenario to consider. What if similar attacks were launched against a Western city? Imagine Paris or Berlin facing a sudden blackout, with water and communications disrupted, and hospitals forced onto backup generators. How would these societies respond? The resilience of Ukraine under such pressure is a warning to all modern nations. Infrastructure is both a shield and an Achilles heel. Economic warfare is also intensifying. Russia, facing sanctions and asset seizures, has begun to strike back in the financial realm. State-owned companies are withdrawing from Western-owned banks, shifting reserves out of the dollar, and seeking alternative trade partners in Asia and Africa. These moves are designed to undermine the economic foundations of the Western alliance and to create new centers of power in the global economy. Speculation in international capitals is running high. As Western governments debate the fate of frozen Russian assets, some experts raise the possibility of territorial compensation, returning land seized during the war in exchange for unfreezing billions in reserves. While still a fringe idea, such suggestions reveal the desperation and creativity now at play. History reminds us that the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, which imposed harsh reparations on Germany, sowed the seeds for future conflict. The lessons are clear. Economic settlements can be as destabilizing as military defeats, if not managed with care. Inside Ukraine, the strain is unmistakable. Political infighting is rising as leaders debate whether to hold elections, negotiate a ceasefire, or continue fighting. Behind closed doors, some officials quietly explore back channels to Moscow, hoping to find a way out before the situation becomes irreversible. Public morale is fraying, and even the most optimistic voices now talk of endurance rather than victory. Donald Trump's willingness to meet with President Zelensky and discuss alternative paths, such as a ceasefire or freezing the conflict, signals the emergence of a new political reality. The idea of a negotiated settlement, once dismissed as defeatism, is gaining traction as the costs of war mount. This shift mirrors past conflicts, such as the Korean War, where stalemate and exhaustion eventually forced both sides to the negotiating table. Yet the risks are enormous. Should Ukraine's logistics collapse and Western support waver, the front lines could unravel with shocking speed. European capitals, already grappling with energy insecurity and political divisions, may soon face hard choices about their own security. The specter of refugee flows, disrupted supply chains, and shaken investor confidence looms large. On the battlefield, Russia's strategy is clear: a war of exhaustion, designed to sap not just Ukraine's military strength, but its will to continue. Each blackout, each evacuation, is a warning to the world that this conflict is as much about psychology and endurance as about territory. The lessons of history are sobering. Wars of attrition often end not with dramatic victories, but with quiet collapse. For those watching from afar, the implications are profound. The war in Ukraine is a laboratory for the future of conflict. It reveals how vulnerable modern societies are to disruptions in energy, information, and morale. It shows how quickly the rules can change and how the consequences can reach far beyond the battlefield. A practical step for individuals and businesses is to assess their own vulnerabilities. How dependent are you on fragile supply chains? Could a disruption in energy or communications affect your livelihood? Consider the example of Taiwanese manufacturers who, anticipating geopolitical risks, have begun to diversify their production away from mainland China. Similar strategies are being adopted by European companies in the wake of the Ukraine war. Another lesson: pay close attention to the language of diplomacy. Sudden shifts in tone, unexpected alliances, or new economic sanctions can provide early warning of major changes. In the months leading up to the Russian invasion in 2022, analysts who tracked diplomatic statements, troop movements, and financial flows were better prepared than those who relied on official reassurances. Information, too, should be treated with caution. In times of crisis, rumors and propaganda spread quickly. The experience of the Syrian civil war showed how both sides used social media to shape perceptions and sow confusion. In Ukraine, the flood of conflicting reports makes it essential to seek out multiple sources and trusted experts before drawing conclusions. The global effects of the war are not confined to headlines or government statements. They are felt in the price of bread in Cairo, the cost of energy in Madrid, and the volatility of stock markets in Tokyo. The interconnectedness of today's world means that local shocks can become global crises overnight. Another practical scenario: as energy shortages ripple through Europe, governments may be forced to ration electricity, as happened during the oil crises of the 1970s. Back then, car-free Sundays, dimmed streetlights, and fuel rationing became everyday realities for millions. Today's challenges may look different, but the underlying lesson remains: resilience requires preparation and adaptability at every level. So how can you protect yourself and your community? Begin with awareness. Map out your dependencies. Stock reasonable reserves of essential supplies, but avoid panic buying. Develop backup plans for communications and energy. If you are an investor, diversify your portfolio and pay attention to geopolitical risk indicators. For organizations, invest in cybersecurity and supply chain resilience. Above all, remain skeptical of official narratives and media hype. Seek out independent voices, local sources, and on-the-ground reporting. History is filled with examples of governments and institutions downplaying or distorting crises until it is too late to act. The early days of the COVID-19 pandemic showed how delays and denial can magnify the impact of a crisis. The war in Ukraine, with its sudden escalations and far-reaching consequences, is a case study in the volatility of the modern world. It is a reminder that power, both electrical and political, is more fragile than we often imagine. The collapse of a grid, a supply chain, or public morale can be as decisive as any military victory. As missile and drone strikes intensify, the stakes for both the battlefield and the home front escalate. The outcome will not be determined solely by military might, but by the capacity to adapt, endure, and innovate under pressure. The next phase of this war, and of global history, will belong to those who can see beyond the headlines and prepare for the unexpected. What we have just witnessed is not merely another round of destruction or the shifting of front lines. It is a deliberate campaign to suffocate power, shatter communications, and paralyze command. Each surge of drones and missiles is more than a physical attack. It is a psychological assault designed to erode resolve and adaptability. The statements from Washington, Moscow, and European capitals are more than diplomatic theater. They signal new rules of engagement, where language, alliances, and perception are as potent as any weapon. The threat is no longer confined to soldiers or distant towns. It reverberates through energy markets, border security, and the confidence of populations worldwide. For those watching, the stakes are enormous. To overlook these signals is to risk being blindsided. The gap between those who prepare and those caught unaware could shape not only individual destinies, but the direction of regional and global security for years to come. As the drumbeat of events grows louder, remember, context is your strongest defense. The true turning point is not just in the destruction of cities or the movement of brigades, but in the contest for control, of narratives, resources, and public will. Seeing these deeper patterns arms you to respond with clarity and purpose. Will you recognize the next escalation in time to act, or will it catch you unprepared? The responsibility is not just with governments or leaders. It is yours, now, as the next chapter of history unfolds.